Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman is on assignment on the show tonight.
Months before that bill lands in your mailbox, local governments, cities, counties, and school districts decide how much money they need.
Our latest WTTW News animated explainer takes on your property tax bill. And then Heather Sharon explains why it might be higher than you expected.
As we start our work in the Capitol,
lawmakers return to Springfield for veto session, what their priorities are.
I think he's a drag on our offices and our races.
Pushback from Trump's own party over his expected campaign announcement. Advocates vow to keep fighting after a tax hike proposal to help address homelessness is blocked in City Council. Smaller turkeys and higher prices are leaving some Americans to wing it for their Thanksgiving meal this year. What's behind this turkey shortage?
I would like people to just completely change their view of individuals that get caught up in the criminal justice system.
How a local lawyer is using her understanding of the criminal justice system to educate through art.
Think if the tree could talk, what it would tell us. I would like to know.
And a tree that's bore witness to generations of Chicago history, it's now being torn down. But first, some of today's top stories. A federal jury convicts the leader of a West Side gang on racketeering, conspiracy, firearm, and drug charges. The jury convicted 40-year-old Donald Lee, who led the Wicked Town Street Gang, along with member 30-year-old Torrance Benson. Prosecutors say the gang was responsible for at least 19 murders and 19 attempted murders, several armed robberies, and assaults.
When you're able to learn about multiple acts of violence that are committed by a group, and it's done either to protect and promote particular criminal activity they have or in retaliation for other crimes that are committed, it allows us to see the full picture, and it allows us to reach a kind of greater breadth of people who are ultimately responsible.
Walmart agrees to pay more than $3 billion to settle opioid lawsuits, and Illinois could be getting a big part of that. The settlement would resolve company allegations over its pharmacy's role in contributing to the opioid addiction crisis by failing to properly oversee opioid distribution at its stores. Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul, a lead negotiator on this case, says the potential settlement would be divided by states, local governments, and tribes. Some new developments coming to the West Side Austin neighborhood. City leaders and community partners broke ground earlier today.
It's so much of an honor to be a part of a project like this, because when I'm gray and I'm old, I can drive down Chicago and I can look back and I say, we did that.
The developments include a $47 million community mixed-use project and a $26 million streetscape project. It's all part of Mayor Lori Lightfoot's Invest Southwest initiative that has now reached its 3-year mark. The mayor's office says there's been over $2 billion in investment commitments since the initiative was announced. And up next, we break down how your property taxes are calculated and why they might be going up this year. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Cook County property tax bills are out more than 150 days late. Bills are typically due August 1st. Instead, they're now going to be due December 30th. And you may notice an increase in your bill as homeowners, not the owners of commercial properties, are bearing more of the tax burden this year than last. Heather Sharon is here in just a moment to recap the details. But first, here's Heather with a look at exactly how your property taxes are calculated. It's the latest in our digital series, WTTW News Explains.
Property taxes can be a doozy, or rather, how they are calculated can be. Months before that bill lands in your mailbox, local governments, cities, counties, and school districts decide how much money they need. Then the folks in charge break out the calculators to figure out how to spread that amount across all of the properties in the area. That's your tax rate. But it isn't an even split. Your final bill or share is based on the value of your home. After all, the owner of a $100,000 house shouldn't be expected to pay the same as someone with a multi-million-dollar mansion, right? So the number crunchers hit the books, calculating the fair market value of each property using a whole bunch of data, like sale price, lot size, neighborhood, home age, and more, all following a series of steps designed to protect taxpayers from wild swings in their bills. As a property owner, you can appeal your fair market value before it's set. Next up, assessment. In Cook County, residential properties are assessed at 10% of fair market value. If your home is valued at $300,000, the assessed value of your property is $30,000. To help make sure everyone pays their fair share, officials then apply a countywide equalizer to the value of each property. And property owners can get breaks or exemptions for a number of reasons, ranging from old age or military service to just living in their own home. Now it's time to finish up the math. Remember the tax rate from the beginning? Multiply it against that final value and voila, you have your annual property tax bill. And of course, that money goes towards critical community services like schools, healthcare, parks, and libraries. Home sweet home.
That's quite the musical soundtrack there. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. All right, Heather, we're all experts now on property taxes and how they're calculated. So why is the second installment so late this year, and what does that mean for efforts to reform the system?
Well, it depends on who you ask. If you talk to Cook County Assessor Fritz Kagi, he says the blame belongs to the Cook County Board of Review. Now, he was elected on promises to make the system more fair and to make it more modern. He said a new system meant that he had to put a new system in place with the Board of Review. The Board of Review said they should have had a backup system, hence the delay.
All right, so everyone pointing fingers at everyone else. What's the difference this year for homeowners? We mentioned that their tax bills might be going up because of the focus on them as opposed to industrial owners.
So every 3 years, every piece of property gets reassessed. It decides how much it's worth. This is the first year that tax bills will reflect Fritz Kagi's assessment of Chicago properties. Now, he says the results of his work would have shifted that burden from homeowners to commercial property owners. However, that's not what homeowners will see on their bills.
Well, why is that the case?
So the Board of Review, again, they get to decide whether Kagi got the evaluation right, and in many cases, they said he did not. So they shifted that burden back to homeowners from commercial property owners, and because it's a zero-sum game, somebody's got to lose.
All right, Heather Sharon, and I should get a little plug in here because tomorrow night I'm going to be reporting on the Cook County tax sale. That is also going on right now. That's when you're a year delinquent on your taxes and a private investor comes in and buys up that lien, and it means big-time interest rates for homeowners. It can be very difficult to claw out. It's become very controversial. So shameless plug, we'll talk about that tomorrow night. But Heather, thank you for talking to us about property taxes tonight.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. And while you're there, be sure to check out more in our WTTW News Explain series. That's at WTTW.com/explains. Well, with the election behind them, Illinois lawmakers are back to governing. They return to the Capitol for the first time in 7 months, as does our own Amanda Vinicky, who joins us now. Amanda.
Yeah, Paris, plenty of times I have stood on this very spot while there is bustling action on the House floor just below me. Now, even though it has been 7 months since their spring session, which adjourned, by the way, 2 months late, well, today was not one of those days. Nothing was really done along the lines of substantive action. Instead, it was more of an atmosphere like coming back to school after summer break.
I'm back to do the work for the residents of my district. I'm back to work with everybody. I hope we can get a lot done. I'm back to do the work of the people, for the people, and it sure feels good to be back in Springfield.
So, Amanda, nothing substantive at all accomplished today?
Well, Paris, in a sense, you can't really blame them for that. This is the veto session, after all, the opportunity that legislators have to reinstate bills that have been rejected by a governor with his veto pen. But you have a Democratic governor in J.B. Pritzker and then Democratic supermajorities in the House and the Senate, and they've been in virtual lockstep. So there were no measures that were vetoed for the legislature to have to deal with. So that is part of why we didn't see a lot of substantive movement. There were a couple of pieces of legislation that moved, and including one that would prompt the state's pension systems to divest from any investments that they have in funds that benefit Russia.
Amanda, is there anything else they could be doing while they're down there right now other than enjoying the fine nightlife that Springfield has to offer?
There's some of that going on, but of course there is plenty. You have lobbyists that are here and interest groups dealing with everything from trying to get security for the tax credits that send low-income students to private schools. I mean, name an issue, and there are folks that are looking for it to be moved. Fentanyl is another one, but some of them that have really gotten a lot of attention are those that include abortion, because after Roe was overturned, the governor promised there would be a special session to deal with bills that would give protections, particularly to out-of-state doctors or those seeking abortions in Illinois. That special session never called. The governor also promised that he would move to enact a statewide ban on assault weapons. Those are still on the agenda, but look for those to be dealt with in January. And there is, in fact, a reason for that. And that is because between now and the end of the calendar year, a supermajority is required, a supermajority of votes required in order for any bill to take effect immediately, or at least not. And that, of course, is the goal here. And then that threshold lowers come January. So that is where you might see some of these measures put off, either for when a new legislature comes in midway through the new year, or a lame duck session that could be called early in 2023. And Paris, I know you're thinking, well, wait a second, supermajorities, Democrats have those, again, in both chambers of the General Assembly. So don't they have the votes? The answer is yes. They do, so it could happen now, but when it comes to more controversial measures, Democrats either can't muster all of those votes, or for political reasons, they don't want every single Democrat to vote for a particular piece of legislation.
It's easier when you just have to have a simple majority and everything resets in the new session. The thing on everybody's minds from the election, the SAFE-T Act, criminal justice bill, even Governor Pritzker has talked about changes. Is anything going to happen on that in the next few days?
You're right. Pritzker has talked about changes, as have other leading Democrats, including some of those who sponsored the bill, as well as the Attorney General. But that same math, the same required supermajorities, that applies. And so it could make fulfilling those pledges to make fixes, that could make it difficult. And Democrats, by the way, might also not be quite as inclined to do so, because they were, of course, attacked by Republicans for being weak on crime all throughout the election. And yet Democrats were victorious in that election. So they might say, hey, we don't really need to do this. But there is a time factor here. I mean, now, arguably, there's a time factor on any number of these issues. You look at things like, say, an assault weapons ban. Those who believe that that is going to save lives, they want it to happen right away, as soon as possible, right? But there's sort of a more material time crunch here when it comes to the SAFE-T Act, and that is because about half of the state's attorneys in Illinois are suing to stop it from taking effect, and there's a court hearing next month on that. And then also the move to cashless bail, that takes effect in January. And so they need to do changes before then, otherwise you really could have a mess on their hands when it comes to that bill. So we do have veto session returning the week after Thanksgiving, and that's when we're expecting there to be more action on that front.
I was going to say maybe they don't have the political pressure to do it anymore, but those states' attorneys, at least about 100 out of 102 of them, want something to be changed in that bill. So we'll see what happens. And Amanda, you're going to join us a little bit later in the program, and so we'll see you then. But up next, where former President Donald Trump's legal troubles stand ahead of his expected announcement tonight. Stay with us.
How do we find resources we had no idea about?
The community seems to want us to be in this space.
There's plenty of potential to do that stuff and keep it within the neighborhood and keep it ours.
Former President Donald Trump is expected to announce his bid for re-election tonight, despite pushback from several members of his own party. It would appear Trump is at his weakest point politically right now after last week's poor GOP midterm performance, but he has been in the underdog position before. Joining us are Renato Mariotti, a former federal prosecutor, legal commentator, and trial lawyer with Bryan Cave, Leighton, and Paisner, and Kent Gray, also a lawyer and a political consultant who served in President Trump's White House and also as the director of Trump's 2016 campaign here in Illinois. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago tonight. Kent Gray, I'll start with you out in Springfield. You are supporting the president this time around, despite the problems, despite legal issues swirling around him and his campaign. How come?
Well, one thing you learn about Donald Trump is no matter what's going on, there's something always swirling around. I've learned that over the last 7 years. So, you know, that's just kind of a factor of life. There are some things that I wish weren't going on in his overall orbit. But in general, I think he did a great job, especially in the first 3 years of his term as president. And I think he is the front runner for the Republican nomination again going forward, and very likely could win in 2024.
And Ken, things like January 6th, election denialism from 2020, that doesn't concern you at all about this president?
Sure, it concerns me, but there were things that concerned me in 2016 when I first worked for him too. There are always things that concern me. There are things that concern me about Joe Biden. There are things that concern me about AOC finally being old enough to run for president. There's a lot of weird things that are going to happen over the next 2 years. Donald Trump is not going to be the only interesting facet of the next 2-year election cycle.
2 years is a long way away. Renato Mariotti, he is facing these not only lawsuits, but federal and state investigations. The thinking here is Trump might want to announce early to get ahead of a potential prosecution and then frame it as a political prosecution. How does that play into the thinking of the DOJ?
You know, I have to think, Paris, that this decision really is already baked into the Justice Department's reasoning. In other words, Donald Trump is the former president of the United States. He's a major political figure, the de facto leader of the Republican Party. I think the other guest was right to say that he's a front runner for the presidency. So I think that the Justice Department knew what they were getting into when they opened an investigation of Donald Trump. I don't expect this to change their decision making.
So it doesn't change their calculation in terms of whether to potentially bring charges with respect to the Mar-a-Lago records case or January 6th?
I don't think so. I think the Mar-a-Lago case is much more likely in terms of potential charges than January 6th, but I don't really see this particular announcement affecting their decision to bring charges one way or another.
All right, Kent Gray, it hasn't exactly been a love fest between Donald Trump and many longtime members of the Republican Party in the last few days. Are you talking to folks, longtime supporters, that are falling off?
Yeah, I mean, there are some folks that are rightfully concerned. I mean, there are some folks that as I talked to somebody earlier, you know, there's a bell curve to Trump support. It was not very existent back in 2015 and early 2016, and then it continued to grow as he did better and better in his performance as president. That's obviously tailed off a little bit, and obviously right now a lot of people are really excited about Governor DeSantis's win in Florida, but we don't know if Governor DeSantis is going to run this time. He's only 44 years of age. I mean, he's got almost 35 years worth of running room to get to the age that Trump and Biden are in this situation. And so I think to me, it seems like getting in early is an attempt to kind of push some folks out of the field to basically, you know, stake a marker down as Donald Trump is a former president who's got a ton of money in his accounts, people all across the country, Secret Service protection, which means he gets a lot of his logistics handled as he travels around the country. These are all things that nascent presidential campaigns, and I didn't just work for Donald Trump. That was my 9th presidential campaign. There's a lot of cost that goes into being out on the road. And by getting in early, any of these other folks who want to do that are going to have to raise money, spend money, hire staff, or they're going to find themselves left in the dust by Donald Trump.
You're saying that infrastructure is already there. Well, let's talk about what we were alluding to. Some are blaming Donald Trump for the GOP's lackluster midterm performance. Here's what many in the party had to say about him running.
I think Trump's kind of a drag on our ticket. I think Donald Trump gives us problems politically.
This election was the funeral for the Republican Party as we know it. The Republican Party, as we have known it, is dead. And voters have made that clear.
I'll support the Republican nominee, but I don't know that it will be him.
Renato Mariotti, we've seen a lot of corruption cases against political figures in Illinois. They tend to take a long time, so say there were to be an indictment, safe to say that there would be no conviction or final outcome before 2024.
I wouldn't be so sure about that. I do think that both the Justice Department and potentially the former president would have an incentive to try to have a trial completed before an election cycle. So I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. You know, obviously there's still a couple years to go before the next election, but it would have to happen pretty soon. If the Justice Department takes its sweet time and doesn't indict for several months, then that's a different story.
And referring to cases against people like Ed Burke and Mike Madigan, which seem to be dragging on forever. Kent Gray, Ron DeSantis is the person that many of the members of the party want to go with. He is polling ahead of Donald Trump in some very recent polling. What do you think a DeSantis versus Trump matchup looks like?
Yeah, I looked at some polling today, and it looks to me like President Trump's in the 50% range, and right after Governor DeSantis comes off of a very successful win and a great campaign, he's in probably the mid-30s, and everybody else is basically way, way, way behind. So I don't see Mike Pence playing a role. You know, I don't see Pompeo playing a role or Chris Christie. I think this is going to be a match between these two, and I think the calculus for Governor DeSantis is, does he really want to get into this long of a fight with Donald Trump when he knows he can run at any time in the future or be the vice presidential nominee if he wants to, with a guy who will be one of the older presidents that's ever in office. So there's a lot of calculus that goes into it. I think a lot of people are jumping to conclusions that Governor DeSantis has made a decision and really wants to run. You know, there's just a lot that's going to happen. A lot of shoes will drop before we get to the end of this process.
And again, one of those shoes might be one of the legal shoes. Renato Mariotti, Donald Trump has always had controversy around him, always had issues, and it seems to have made him stronger with the base. Do you think that an indictment could have the effect of making him look like a martyr, a victim, and make him more powerful?
Well, I'm not an expert on politics or how the base is going to react, but I will say that he's certainly done a very masterful job of spinning legal problems that he's had. I think most people who are under criminal investigation get beleaguered by that, not the former president. I think he's done a very masterful job of doing that. Obviously, it remains to be seen if he's indicted, whether that'll change things, but I suspect he's already got some spin in the works for that.
There's certainly probably a team in place to deal with those kinds of things. All right, Renato Mariotti, Kent Gray, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts.
Thanks for having us.
And up next, we introduce you to Lincoln Park Zoo's oldest inhabitant. It might not be exactly what you're thinking. We'll explain right after this.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
There's much more ahead on the program, including city council controversy over a tax increase aimed at addressing homelessness. But first, there's a centuries-old attraction at Lincoln Park Zoo, but it's soon coming to an end. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley explains.
Rhinos, apes, lions. These are what people expect to see at Chicago's Lincoln Park Zoo. But there are other inhabitants that often go overlooked. We're talking about trees.
Here at Lincoln Park Zoo, we are an accredited arboretum, so we have over 300 species of woody plants here at the zoo.
There's one tree in particular that's worth a little extra attention. It's a bur oak, nestled between the Park Place Cafe and the Primate House. What's so special about this tree? Well, let's just say it's got more than a few rings on its trunk. It's somewhere between 250 and 300 years old, making it the zoo's oldest resident.
Which is amazing when you think about it. Predates the incorporation of the city of Chicago.
That means the tree has witnessed a lot of history. It lived through the Great Chicago Fire, the World's Columbian Exposition, Chicago's first skyscrapers.
As its call letters imply, it will provide you with a window to the world.
And the tree might even have tuned into one of WTTW's first broadcasts.
Millions of people have passed the tree and maybe not even understood what they were walking next to, which is amazing. Just think if the tree could talk, what it would tell us. I would like to know.
Katrina Quint heads the zoo's horticulture program, and she's got some bad news to share. The bur oak's days are numbered.
We were slightly joking the other day that the horticulture team might need the day off when the tree comes down, because it's very sad for us to see something so beautiful removed.
One of the first warning signs the oak was in decline, 2 years ago, the tree prematurely dropped all of its leaves in August. Quint and her team tried to save the tree, but after hundreds of years of weather fluctuations, foot traffic, and wildlife, she says it was just time.
It was nearing, a natural end of life in an urban setting.
But Quint says a tree coming to a natural end is an excellent reminder of the importance of a process called succession planting. That requires Quint and her team to plan and plant younger trees about 50 years out, all in an effort to keep the zoo's tree canopy healthy and evolving over time.
We have to have all sorts of different species in order to create a really nice canopy. Also helps us with insect pressure. So if you have an insect or a disease that comes in that, say, is going to wipe out the maples, if we have only maples, then all of our trees are gone.
But in order to think about the big picture, Quint says you have to start with the small picture, acorns.
I would start collecting the acorns, start propagating them, make sure they're growing them on, and then replant them back someplace in the zoo and plan for succession. It might be every couple of years we're planting more and more oaks, so then your canopy will continually be aging, and you'll be able to have trees consistently over the years.
And having trees is a great thing, she says. Not only do they contribute to human health by providing oxygen, but they also create home for wildlife and zoo life, which isn't something visitors might consider when spotting animals in their man-made habitats.
We might put the plants in an exhibit and know that it's just enrichment for the animal. Like Japanese macaques, we planted some willows in there recently, and they just used them for fun, and they're completely destroyed. But that's part of it. That's how we give them enrichment in that sense.
Back to the old bur oak. Quint and her team have been able to collect some of its acorns, which they're hoping will sprout. But the tree seemed to have had a succession plan of its own. Some bur oak saplings have popped up nearby all by themselves. A couple hundred years from now, imagine the stories they'll have.
Katrina Quint says visitors have at least until spring to see the bur oak before it's removed. You can visit our website for more details.
Patty Whetley, if those branches could talk, what a story they would tell. And as I understand, you still have about a year, right, or 6 months before it's actually going to be turned.
At least until spring. Nothing is going to happen to the tree. So rush to the zoo now and go see it for the first time.
We still have a chance to pay our respects here.
Yes.
So what about the trunk? Is anything going to happen to the trunk? Are they going to use it for anything?
Yeah, they're figuring that out right now. They're not 100% sure what they're going to do with it. They have some ideas. It could be used as perches in some of the animal habitat. They could slice some of the trunk, use it in an interpretive display to show people its age, and like we mentioned, all the things that it's seen and witnessed through history, and it is part of history, really, when you think about it.
Absolutely. Hopefully the tree will have a second life then.
Yes.
All right, Patty Whetley, great story. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And still to come on Chicago Tonight, state lawmakers are back in Springfield as veto session gets underway. We're one-on-one with departing House GOP leader Jim Durkin on the future of his party. Advocates vow to keep fighting after a tax hike proposal to help address homelessness is blocked in City Council. We hear from 2 older people. Your Thanksgiving turkey might leave your family less stuffed than usual thanks to a nationwide shortage, or your wallet less stuffed. And printmaking with a purpose. A criminal justice lawyer is using art to help people better understand the reality of the criminal justice system. But first, some more of today's top stories. U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth responds to reports of a Russian missile killing 2 people in Poland. Polish authorities blame a Russian-made missile for the deaths of 2 Polish citizens in an explosion near the border with Ukraine. In a statement, Senator Duckworth says if the reports are true, quote, Vladimir Putin must be held accountable for his ongoing aggression in Ukraine as his actions continue to take innocent lives. Field Museum workers are asking President and CEO Julian Siggers to recognize their union.
My coworkers and I are asked to do so much in service of passion, science, and a noble cause. But as passionately as we feel, our passionate work is not met with commensurate pay.
Organizers say a majority of the museum's employees have signed union authorization cards in their effort to formally unionize. Workers say they're unionizing for higher wages, career stability, and clear paths for advancement. The holiday season of shopping is fast approaching, and Chicago police and transit officials are announcing more security along transportation routes across the city in an effort to keep commuters safe while they shop.
There's a ton of activities going on in the city. We're out here to serve and protect. We're going to be on the platforms. We're going to be in the stations. And we just want to make sure it's a great season for everybody.
Some of those safety tips offered by the CPD include being aware of your surroundings, securing wallets and phones in zipped pockets, keeping shopping bags close to you, and keeping headphone volume low enough to hear what's happening nearby. Illinois' newly elected state legislators will be inaugurated in January, but there's already changeover at the Capitol. At the top levels, that is. Amanda Vinicky joins us now from the Illinois House chambers. Amanda, there's some news on some leadership positions that just came out recently.
Yeah, Paris, we have news. You had both Republican caucuses from the House and the Senate meeting tonight to choose who will be their leaders, and there is turnover on both fronts. For the first time, a woman will be leading the House Republicans, and that is Toni McCombie. She had previously been the mayor, I believe, of Savannah, and then also turnover in the Senate Republicans. No longer going to be Dan McConkey as the minority leader. Instead, John Curran of Downers Grove will be taking over that position come January. Right now, I am joined by Jim Durkin, who currently holds the role of House Minority Leader, and he announced that he would not be seeking another term the day after the November 8th election. So for starters, Leader Durkin, thanks for joining us. What made you decide that it was time for a change? Clearly, GOP, including your caucus, suffered some defeats.
I made a decision after this year's primary that for me to continue on in this position, I had to hit a certain threshold of seats that I needed to win. And I came up short. And I've done this job for 9 years. I have no regrets. I've been involved in some amazing pieces of legislation, historic moments in Springfield, but I'm also, at this point, I believe it's right for me to be able to say goodbye and pass it off to the next generation for bring a new set of eyes, new energy, and I'm really happy to have placed my vote in support of Toni McCombie, the first woman ever to serve as a leader in the House of Representatives in the history of this building. So it's a historic moment for Illinois and also for the Republican Party.
And yet the Republican Party, again, not just in the House, but suffered defeats. To what do you attribute that?
It's the fringe elements that took over the party, and they hijacked mainly the primaries. And we nominated people who generally are not, I mean, at least at the top of the ticket. I'll be very blunt. Darren Bailey was never going to succeed in the suburbs and the collar counties, and obviously not in the city of Chicago. And that's where the votes are. You probably got 65, 70% of the votes come out of that area. But Darren Bailey is too extreme. But the fact is he won the primary because the party is shrinking. Many people have left the party and they're independent voters. So it leaves far-right conservatives who will nominate Republicans in these statewide primaries.
How do you reverse that, especially while you're in the super minority that does not allow you to have an easy passage of legislation?
Look, this is going to be a real rebuilding process. We did not get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of this overnight. But let me just say this. I'm considered a moderate. I've been referred to as a rhino, and I take pride with that. And you know what? I'm pretty conservative on a lot of fiscal issues and a lot of other issues, but we have to be more accepting of men and women who may differ with Republicans on the issues with the platform or these conservative values regarding choice, regarding the Second Amendment, LGBT, those issues, which we have done a terrible job of putting those people and pushing them to the side because they're not pure enough under the Republican principles. If we're going to be the party of the big tent, which we like to talk about, we're not doing a good job of it. We have not played the game of addition. We've been down the road with subtraction. And you know what? I'm very proud of my votes. I'm the Republican leader who voted for the Equal Rights Amendment. I voted for the assault weapon ban. I voted to ban conversion therapy. I voted for school reform, and I negotiated that. So a lot of people look at that as not being really a true Republican, but I'm looking at the state, and I have to work hard to make sure that people realize that the Republican Party is more than just a few voices. There's good men and women, we've got good ideas, and we have to be more inclusive.
Have to be more inclusive, as Leader Durkin noted. Perhaps a sign of more inclusion could be the first woman elected into a leadership position for the Illinois House, at least in history. And we're hoping to be speaking with Leader-elect McCombie sometime soon. With that, sending it back to you.
All right, Amanda, thanks very much, and our thanks to outgoing Minority Leader Jim Durkin. And coming up, a city council proposal hits a roadblock. We explain that. A plan to boost funding for homelessness by $160 million got the cold shoulder from City Council yesterday. Not enough older people even showed up to consider the proposal. Supporters say it'll tax the super wealthy to help out the poor, but opponents say it will put a strain on small and medium-sized developers and real estate investors. Mayor Lightfoot supported the plan in her 2019 campaign, and now she opposes it. And joining us now with more are Alderwoman Maria Haddon of the 49th Ward and Alderman George Cardenas of the 12th Ward. Welcome both of you here to Chicago tonight. So let's lay out the basics of this proposal for our viewers. The current real estate transfer tax is $3.75 for every $500 on a sale. This proposal would call boosting that up to $13.75 per 500 on properties that sell for more than $1 million. As we mentioned, bringing about $160 million in revenue to go toward homelessness. Alderwoman Haddon, why is this the right way to go, in your opinion?
Right now, we are seeing a growing crisis of people experiencing homelessness in our city. And when we started this work, this was already an issue. We have seen actually what we can do with the amount of funding that we're seeking. With this $200 million that we have in the Chicago Recovery Plan, we've been able to do rapid rehousing events, emergency rental assistance, outreach services, social services, wraparound services for folks put in permanent supportive housing. And even with the increase that we're doing, we're still not quite meeting the need. But we know these federal funds are not going to last forever. And so this is an opportunity for a more progressive revenue source to help us create a dedicated source for a growing crisis of funding.
Alderman Cardenas, could this $160 million be a game change for homelessness in Chicago?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that we need to pay more attention to housing and the housing crisis. This pandemic has unleashed a lot of forces. One, which happens to be people didn't get treatment, people didn't see their doctors and their psychologists. They were affected by the economic impact of COVID-19. And I can understand, not just in the city, but in many other municipalities, they have the same issue as we do. And for a reason. So every study that I've looked at points to the fact that we need to get back to the basics of connecting with people, getting the help that they need. In a very broad way, very consistent way. So I think everybody that I've talked to, my colleagues, are on the same page. What we disagree, though, it's on the how. And I do not support a property tax increase. I didn't support the fact that we tied the increase of the levy in the city to CPI, but here we are. And I think people are cognizant of the fact that you can't put everything on property owners, funding every special need that we have. We do have funding from the federal government. In the 2022 budget, we are allocating about $214 million for housing. Now, does that everything for the homeless? That's something to be, just work with the administration, allowing more money for homeless.
I'll pick up on that, but I want to go back to Alderwoman Haddon, because we also have to explain to viewers that this is not an ordinance that you can pass. This was for a referendum to put it to the voters. So absolutely. What exactly happened yesterday? This is when this was supposed to be taken up.
So this is a levy that we would like to do. We need the voters of Chicago to affirmatively say that this is something that they would support. So we're looking for a ballot referendum to be on the February 28th municipal ballot to let voters to decide. It's not a property tax increase. We know that the mayor even took a property tax increase out. This is a one-time sales tax on luxury housing, right? But either way, Chicago should decide. So yesterday we called a special city council meeting in order to have a hearing. So what we needed to do for the state statute was to have public comment to hear what people thought about it. After public comment, properly noticed, kind of higher standards than normal, which we went through in order to have this meeting, then we could vote, and if City Council approved it, we could put it on the ballot, and then if voters approved it, so a lot of ifs, right? If voters approved it in February, then it could come back to City Council, where then we would be empowered to pass an actual ordinance and change the tax. So there are a lot of steps to this. All we needed yesterday was for people to show up, for aldermen to show up for a properly noticed special City Council meeting in order for public commenters to have their say.
And do you think Mayor Lightfoot prevented some aldermen from coming out?
We had a lot of people who were confirmed to be there. We've noticed this meeting. It's been a couple of weeks. We've been working on this. So a lot of people who said they would be there expressed concerns at the last minute. So it was expressed to us that they'd received calls from people telling them that they were going to have to vote on something, or that this was a property tax and they didn't want to be associated with it. So I was happy that we were able to recess the meeting and wait until we had more alders in the building for Finance Committee. But even then, we hit 25, and even with some people in the building, in the hallway, they chose not to come in to that quorum, so we did not have the public hearing.
Clearly, the brakes being put on this. Alderman Cardenas, you mentioned you're concerned about this added tax on luxury properties. What is a better way to take a bite at this apple?
I understand the mechanics. I mean, it's leading to a property tax increase. We can meet today, we can meet tomorrow, we can meet next month on it, debate it. But at the end of the day, what the premise is a dedicated funding source, which is a property tax increase, which I don't support, and a lot of my colleagues don't support it for the reasons that I outlined. Now, what are the mechanisms that we can get the funding homelessness? Look, a lot of the money that came from TARP and from the federal government and the ARP funds were dedicated to address some of the ailments from COVID-19, even though, it was probably before that we were having some issues, but it unearthed an ability for us to be able to meet that need head on from those funds. We need to continue to urge Congress to pass more funding for cities that are beset by the aftermath of the pandemic, and to keep funding for services, not just housing, but services to be able to help people where they're at. I know that we deal with it on a daily basis. My staff does that. We reach out to people, but some people don't want to be helped. They need other types of help, not housing per se.
You're asking for more. You're asking for more federal funding, Alderman Carson. We're out of time, but I have to ask you, because you are leaving office at the end of this month to take your new job that you were elected to at the Board of Review. The mayor gets to pick your successor. Are you going to have a say in who your successor is going to be as alderman?
I think there's a committee, there's a process that's been put in place. I don't get to chime in that process. I'm not part of that committee. I just hope that they choose someone qualified, someone who knows how to do the job.
Folks applying for that job right now, and the mayor will make a selection pretty soon. And our thanks to Alderman Maria Haddon and Alderman George Cardenas. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Up next, a turkey shortage might leave some families winging it for their Thanksgiving meal. What's behind that shortage? Right after this. Thanksgiving revelers plotting their big turkey meal better act fast. The cost of turkeys are on the rise, and there might be a shortage the closer we get to the holiday. So what's behind the price increase, and how can families feast without leading to financial famine? Joining us are Richard Giebert, president of the Illinois Farm Bureau, Allison Friedheim, executive vice president at Kugel Foods, and Marcy Pershall, owner of Troggs Hollow Farm. Thank you all for joining us. So, Richard Giebert, I'll start with you. On average, how much more expensive are turkeys right now?
Well, it depends on where you are in the country and where the turkeys are raised, be it in your feed costs and availability of transportation and things like that. But it depends on where you are in the country. But here in the Midwest, we have a good source of soybean meal and corn for the producers, and so that really helps a lot here in the Midwest.
Helps mitigate that price a little bit. Allison Friedheim, what are the factors across the country leading to these higher prices and perhaps shortage?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into the pricing. It's sort of the same thing you're hearing with price increases everywhere. The cost of doing business is up across the board, whether it's feed prices, fuel, the cost of packaging, labor continues to be an issue. So all of these factors contribute to the cost of raising turkeys.
Marcy Pershall, the avian bird flu has also been a huge issue this year. How has that impacted your farm?
We've been pretty lucky. We haven't had any issues with bird flu here, but we did have to be really careful about birds that we were bringing in, you know, kind of keeping them separate, trying to keep birds. We kept our turkeys we had them on pasture and we kept them out of the field for as long as we could, but eventually you have to put them out. So a lot of it was just wishing and hoping, and we got lucky.
So a lot of turkeys having to shelter in place here to avoid getting avian flu. Richard Giebert, how big a thing has avian flu been for the turkey industry just across the country?
Well, it depends on different parts of the country have been impacted more so than right here in the state of Illinois. We probably had more backyard bird flocks that have been impacted. And we're very fortunate no commercial herds or flocks here in the state of Illinois have been greatly impacted. So for us in Illinois, we're in pretty good shape, depends on what part of the country. And if you're in a flyway of migratory birds, that has quite an impact as well.
Allison Friedheim, what about the availability and the stock of turkeys? Are you seeing signs that if shoppers don't go out and get their turkeys soon, they might be out of luck closer to Thanksgiving Day?
Yeah, I mean, rest assured, the turkey industry works, 365 days a year to get ready for this one protein-specific holiday. So I don't think anyone should be concerned about not having a turkey on their plate if that's what they want. Now, the size that they want or the brand that they want, now that may be limited. So I wouldn't wait to go buy your turkey the day before, but I'm sure you'll be able to find a turkey if that's what you want to do.
Marcy, so it's not just the avian flu that's had an impact on all this, but how about COVID? Has COVID impacted your industry and your farm?
Yes, and I'm going to speak to what I know, which is that COVID slowed down a lot of the animal processing. When it first hit around here, I know that a lot of the processing places, whether it was for, pigs or cows or whatever, sometimes there were shutdowns and things like that. And it seems like things haven't caught up. And so it's hard to get an appointment to process your birds. And in addition to that, with COVID, a lot of people decided they were going to start raising, whether it was a small flock of backyard chickens or their own meat. And so it's become much more difficult to secure those appointments. You have to really, really think ahead to be able to get, your birds in, your cows in, your pigs in, whatever it is. So it's still impacting us even now because it's like we never caught up.
A big impact on the farm industry. Richard Giebert, how big of an impact has inflation had on Illinois' farm industry writ large?
A dramatic impact. And, we've seen inflation of 7 to 9%. When we look at our input cost, some of our fertilizer costs have increased as much as 300%. We're looking at a 15 to 20% increase in seed costs for next year. Our dry fertilizer has increased probably 50 to 75%. And so, and then on the pesticide side, we're seeing doubling and tripling of some of those costs of the crop protectants that we've used in the past. So it does have a great impact. And what I'm hearing from my local banker in particular, the operating loans have been increased dramatically, almost doubling from the previous, from 2021, because of just the high cost and the high operating cost of running a farm today. Cash flow is a real challenge.
Allison Friedheim, how has that impacted you in the distribution sector of the industry?
Yeah, well, fuel and labor continues to be an issue. So it costs a lot more to run our trucks to make deliveries. It's harder to find drivers to work and food handlers and food processors in our rooms, in our various poultry cutting rooms. So it's definitely been a challenging year for sure.
Marcy Pershall, how can Thanksgiving revelers support local farmers, buy turkeys that are raised by local farmers, as opposed to perhaps Butterball or some other big brand like that?
Sure. Well, your first best thing to do is to Google and see who around you is selling and raising turkeys. And you often have a couple options. Some will have frozen, some will have fresh. And you just kind of have to look around and see who's got them. And that is one of the best ways. Some areas still have off-season farmers markets going, so you can check those out too. But your best thing is to just Google and see who's around. There's so many small local farms that are doing birds and vegetables, which are also really nice for your Thanksgiving dinner. And so, just find them, call them, and they're more than likely going to try to help you, if they don't have it, help you find one somewhere.
Of course, we can't forget about the vegetables and all the side dishes and the pies and the desserts. And good turkey tips from all of you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
You too.
Happy Thanksgiving. And up next, printmaking with a purpose. But first, we take a look at the weather. A local lawyer is using what she's learned in the workforce to create art that aims to help people better understand the reality of Cook County's criminal justice system. Arts correspondent Angel Ito introduces us to Ina Silverglide and shares how she's using printmaking to help inform others.
We put people away for murders they didn't commit in Cook County. Cook County is first. We are first in doing that. There is no other county in the U.S. that puts more innocent people away.
Lawyer Ina Silverglide says she's been practicing art longer than she's been practicing the law. But it wasn't until 2016 that she realized she could combine both passions to spark new conversations.
Now that I do the work that I do, which is mostly addressing criminal justice issues, sometimes I just want to say something, and I'm hoping that somebody will see it and maybe think twice about whatever they believe they know about the criminal justice system.
In classes taken at the Chicago Printmakers Collaborative, Silverglide found herself utilizing printmaking practices such as lithography and mezzotint to create pieces in response to her current work.
The school to prison pipeline and the more recent science about how our brains aren't fully matured until we're like 25, 26, or something that was going on in the larger community, like when George Floyd was murdered. That prompted a need on my part to make, to make something.
Silverglide also wants her work to educate.
Especially people who have never had to interact with the criminal justice system. I think they're the ones that are most in need of being educated. Not everybody believes that the criminal justice system is unfair, Not everybody wants to believe that if you're a person of color, you're going to be treated differently. And so, some people don't want to hear that because they want to think our justice system is perfect. They want to believe that police never lie on the stand and state's attorneys don't lie when they're presenting a case. But based on my own experience, I know both lie, and so yes, our system is really imperfect. People that get caught up in the system are no different than you and I. I don't know if that my work, I have a particular piece that says that, but it's this notion that we can't demonize a third of the population that gets arrested for a crime. Because a third of our population has an arrest record by the age of 23. And if you're African American male, it's 49%. Those are just totally outrageous statistics. So we can't afford as a nation to demonize everybody that gets an arrest record or conviction for a minor misdemeanor, because they need to come back into the workforce and they need to be productive citizens. And that's what most of them want to do when they get done, or when they grow up and they wise up and they're like, boy, that was a dumb thing I did. And yet we're making it so incredibly hard for them to do that. And we shouldn't. And I know that's going to take a whole lot of re-education. And that's kind of one of the things that I've tried to do in my practice.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Visit our website for more information on how to view Silverglide's artwork. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
That's a wrap for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast in the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Illinois legislators weigh changes to the controversial Safety Act. We have a live report from Springfield. And thousands of Cook County homeowners delinquent on their property taxes face massive interest payments if they don't act soon. We'll explain. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.